Hello, everybody. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. I got a list from Sadie, and she has at the top students who get extra credit. It is those of you who have followed the Keel Pigs on Instagram since Monday. So you've at least got an advocate for you in the household. I'm not going to say that it is going to make any difference, but I'm also not going to say that it's not going to make any difference. Leaving myself a lot of wiggle room there. So hopefully you are enjoying Ginger and Hazel and their various things that they're up to in our house and in our neighborhood. Okay. Sorry, I was eating my between classes snack there, and but now we're good to go. Okay, so we have done some practice problems with possessory estates. We have started to introduce some ideas about future interests. And today we are going to continue with that discussion and get a little more detail into it. Okay. And so what we're going to do today is complicate, in particular, what I mean or what we mean when we talk about remainders. Okay. So I'm going to pull up the chart again, eventually. As we do this work, you guys should be pretty comfortable that there are possessory interests that allow someone to go on the property. There are future interests that are retained by the grantor, reversions, possibilities of reverter, and rights of entry. And then there are future interests that are held by other people, right? Remainders and executory interests. And the future interests that are complicated are those future interests that are held by someone else. So executory interests and remainders. And so the most important thing to keep in mind, and this is kind of foreshadowing what we'll cover on Monday, is that when there is a future interest that is given to someone else, a remainder or an executory interest, it might remain uncertain for a long period of time. Okay, there might be some sort of condition placed on it or condition placed on the fee simple subject to an executory limitation that is going to be very uncertain for a long period of time. And because of that, the property can end up being saddled with these uncertain future interests for long periods, potentially in perpetuity, right? Forever. When property is saddled with uncertain future interests and is uncertain, we have alienability problems, okay? And so I just want to sort of note that at the outset, that these kinds of, the sort of reason we end up going into this level of detail is because when we have uncertainty, we have an alienability problem, and the whole system of estates is there to promote alienability, to make it easier for people to know what the state of title is with regard to a bit of property, okay? So with all that being said, let's wade into this. So, it's like we're entering the remainder vortex here. Like we've got our chart and it looks so nice, but now we're going to dive into this orangish yellow area and see that there's actually more there than just the word remainder. Okay, there are actually 4 flavors of remainder, and we've talked about 2 of them already. Okay, one of them we've talked about explicitly, and one of them we've talked about just because it's the easy one, and we have just used that as our basic example of what a remainder is. So what I want to do for the next little while, and I apologize, it's going to end up being a little bit lectury, but I hope that y'all will throw the blue hands up and interrupt me as necessary, is walk through these 4 types of remainders and identify the distinguishing characteristics of them. And to do so, we're going to use the examples of when you might see them, right? Examples of them being created. Okay. The 2 that we've already kind of talked about are contingent remainders and indefeasibly vested remainders. The indefeasibly vested remainders are remainders that are the easiest. Okay. And so we might not have called them indefeasibly vested remainders previously, but from now forward, we will now call them indefeasibly vested remainders. Before, we might have just called them remainders. Okay, but now that we're seeing that there's this variety of remainders, and in fact, variety of vested remainders, we're going to have to call them something a little more specific, indefeasibly vested remainders. Before I do go into that level of detail for each of these types of remainders, I want to note that it is unlikely that you're going to run into these as legal interests. Okay, just like I said before, most property is held in fee simple, like legal fee simple. It is therefore the case that most property doesn't have any remainders attached to it. However, remainders are extraordinarily common within the context of trusts. Okay, and so where are you? And everything that we're learning about remainders here is applicable for remainders that are inside of a trust. Okay, so I just want to note that we're not really going to talk about it in that way at all, but I want to note it because partially I want you to not say, well, what's the point of learning all this stuff if there aren't remainders anywhere, right? I want you to recognize that if you are a estate planner, a wills and trusts lawyer, you're going to be knee deep in remainders, okay? And in really the whole system of estates. Okay. So let's walk through the examples and the types of remainder, the different flavors of remainder. So I've mentioned that the first one is an indefeasibly vested remainder and that we've actually already encountered it. So let's start at the example. To A for life, then to B. That is a very straightforward life estate with remainder being held by B. So the questions that we're asking on this chart are, do we know who holds the remainder? Do we know whether or when it will become possessory? And might it be forfeited? And if it can be forfeited, under what circumstances? When would it be forfeited? So the indefeasibly vested remainder is great because the answers to all these questions are somewhat straightforward. Okay, do we know who holds it? Yes, we know who holds an indefeasibly vested remainder. In this example, B holds the indefeasibly vested remainder. We'll contrast that with the contingent remainder later. Okay, so we know who has it. Second, this is the vesting part of indefeasibly vested remainder. When does it become possessory? In other words, when does the future interest switch over to the other side of the chart and become a possessory interest? In this example, with an indefeasibly vested remainder, it just happens. Okay, as soon as the prior estate expires, then the future interest, this remainder, is ready to take. Nothing has to happen before it is ready to take. It stands ready at any point as soon as the prior life estate, A's life in this instance, is over, then B is ready to step in. The indefeasibly vested remainder, what makes it vested is that it is ready today, ready at this instant to become possessory. Nothing else has to happen. Okay? And then the third question we ask is, might something happen to it that would make it go away? In this example, no. Okay? At the moment of conveyance here, A creates a life estate. A gets a life estate. B gets an indefeasibly vested remainder. There's nothing that can happen to that indefeasibly vested remainder. It exists, it's created at conveyance. B can do whatever they want with it. They've got it. Okay, this is like Gruen. Gruen's son had an interest. They could do whatever they wanted with that interest. No one could interfere with that interest. They were ready for that interest to become possessory at the end of the father's life. Okay, indefeasibly vested remainder. We know who has it. We know that that interest is going to become possessory, and there's nothing that can happen that can interfere with that. Okay, these are your best case scenario remainders. They are easy. They are certain. They are lovely. Okay, we like indefeasibly vested remainders. Where you have rules of construction that, where there's something ambiguous, the presumption is for an indefeasibly vested remainder. Okay, we like them. They are the best. They are the most certain. They rock. Okay. Questions on indefeasibly vested remainders? Yeah, Peyton.
So it sounded like you were talking, when you got to column 3, you were talking about the certainty of it becoming a fee simple or taking effect at the expiration of the life estate. Sorry. And it sounded like you said that was what distinguished it as vested. Doesn't it also have to be to a definite person to be vested? Isn't it like if you check both of those boxes, it's vested? If not, it might be contingent. I was unsure about that. In the reading in 280 or so, I was about this.
So it's possible. So if you'll see this down here, it's possible for a vested remainder to be to an unclosed class, in which case we know that someone has it, but the someones who have it might grow or change in some way. So I think, the way I'm going to answer your question is, I think that's a perfectly fine way to be thinking about it, right? That part of vesting is being able to point to the person and being able to say they are ready now to take it. The only exception I would say is this vested subject to open, these class gifts, which we'll get to in a moment. Okay. Other questions on the indefeasibly vested remainder? Okay. So let's contrast it with 2 other types of vested remainders. The first one is the vested remainder subject to divestment. Okay. So note that indefeasibly, like as an adverb here, is saying there ain't nothing happening to this remainder. It is what it is. But note the language here, vested remainder subject to divestment. So it's vested, but it's subject to being unvested or divested, taken away. That is this one. So just linguistically, you can kind of see already what kind of interest it is. It is a remainder that I've got, but that I might lose. Okay, so let's use our example. To A for life, then to B, but if B smokes a cigar during A's life, then to C. Okay, to A for life, then to B, but if B smokes a cigar during A's life, then to C. Okay, so we're focusing here on B's interest. Okay, we're going to talk about C's interest here maybe by the end of class. Okay, but let's focus in right now on B's interest, because B's interest is the remainder. Okay, A has a life estate. B has the remainder in this example. B is an ascertainable person. If nothing changes, B is ready to take this property. Okay, so in those two ways, it's vested. We know who's got it. We know that they are ready today to take it. However, what makes this one distinct from the indefeasibly vested remainder is this column. Okay, can it be forfeited? Yes, it can be divested. It can be forfeited or divested at any point prior to becoming possessory if the condition happens, right? In this example, if B smokes a cigar during A's life, then poof, B's interest goes, wait for it, up in smoke, okay? A vested remainder subject to divestment can be forfeited. That is its distinguishing characteristic. There is language in the conveyance that puts a condition on this remainder that after the conveyance, if something changes, then boom, the remainder is divested and disappears. Okay, so to A for life, then to B, but if B smokes a cigar during A's life, then to C. B's interest here is a vested remainder subject to divestment. It's vested because we know who has it and we know that they're ready right now. But the way that this is phrased, if something happens later, okay, but before the end of A's life, so after the conveyance, but before the end of A's life, then B's interest will be divested, it will go away, and it's gone. Okay? That cannot happen with an indefeasibly vested remainder. B might sell their interest. B might do all sorts of other things with their interest. B might die and have their interest passed to someone else. There are things that can happen to B, and B can pass that stick around. But the stick remains the same. If B smokes a cigar, in this example, the stick, gone. Okay? So that is the distinguishing characteristic between a regular old and indefeasibly vested remainder, which we love, and a vested remainder subject to divestment, which can be complicated. Okay? Annie.
Okay, so I just want to clarify if my line of thinking is correct. Because right now we're only talking about remainders, all of the examples are for sure life estates, but any language after the for life is what determines what kind of remainder. Okay.
Precisely. Yep.
Okay, and then one other point of clarification, the divestment moment, that only pertains to the can it be forfeited column, not when does it become possessory, or does it kind of overlap? Because when it's forfeited, then
it won't become possessory.
Okay, I see it. Okay.
Yeah. So I could put on here unless it has been forfeited.
Okay, great. That's just, I just wanted to clarify.
Okay. And the first question that Annie asked, I want y'all to hear it loud and clear. If you don't have a life estate, then you're not in this chart. Okay. This will only apply when it begins with a life estate, when there is a life estate somewhere in the conveyance. Because if there isn't a life estate somewhere in the conveyance, then there isn't a remainder anywhere in the conveyance. Okay. So if you are not finding a life estate, so note every one of these examples, 2A for life, 2A for life, 2A for life, 2A for life, 2A for life. All of those are life estates where the where the action is in these examples is in the remainder, right? In the language after that life estate has been given. Okay. Note that we're not really talking yet about what happens at the end of the life estate. Okay, we sort of are here. At the end of the life estate, then we will sort of move forward, and all of these remainders will have the potential to switch over and become something, right? So if B does not smoke a cigar during A's life, Annie, I'll ask you, what happens when A dies?
Then B gets the remainder in fee simple.
Gets the fee simple. Good. I'm glad you caught yourself. Okay. So B had a vested remainder subject to divestment. The stuff happened, right? B didn't smoke a cigar. A then died. B's interest becomes possessory in the form of a fee simple at that time. It might have said then to B, but if B smokes a cigar in the next 3 years, okay? What happens in that example if 3 years pass and B has not smoked a cigar during those 3 years? Annie, what do you think?
Same thing, right?
Well, but A's still alive in this example.
Oh, but A's still alive and B has not smoked.
So if it says during, instead of during A's life, it says for 3 years.
Okay. Then B just still maintains the remainder?
B maintains the remainder, but is it still vested subject to divestment?
No, it's indefeasibly vested.
Good.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I
It's
ask
indefeasibly vested at that point because no longer can it be forfeited. The language that made it forfeitable, if B smokes a cigar in the next 3 years, has passed. The 3 years passed. B didn't smoke a cigar. It's no longer forfeitable. It's ready to be taken. B has an indefeasibly vested remainder at that time. So remainders, really any interests, can change their nature as facts accrue, right? So at the moment of conveyance, you would say B has a vested remainder subject to divestment. But then 3 years later, you would say, well, now B has an indefeasibly vested remainder. Okay.
Can I ask one more question?
And then I'm going to ask you one more question.
Okay. Would C technically have nothing until it was forfeited and then they would get the remainder in fee simple?
Good. That was kind of the question I was going to ask you. The answer is no. They would have something. They would have an executory interest. Okay. So y'all can pencil that in, that C's interest here is an executory interest, and we're going to come back to that. Okay. But the second part of what you asked, Annie, is what I'm going to ask you, which is, what if B does smoke a cigar and forfeits their interest? Then what does C have?
Is A still alive?
A's still alive.
Then C would have the indefeasibly vested remainder.
Terrific. Okay. So just following, so everybody can follow Annie's thought process here. B had a vested remainder subject to divestment. It was in fact divested. So B is out. So that means we got to go to the next step. Then to C. Then to C looks kind of like this, right? From a linguistic standpoint, from a conveyance. And so they are in now. And they are in the form of an indefeasibly vested remainder that is waiting patiently. And now C's got it. Okay, waiting patiently for the end of A's life, can't be forfeited, nothing can happen to it. It's as though it said to A for life, then to C, because B's interest has been eliminated in that example. Okay. More questions on vested subject to divestment? We're good. Okay. Let's go to the third type of vested remainder. This one is sometimes called a vested remainder subject to partial divestment, and it's distinguished in that way from the one we just spoke about, which is sometimes called a vested remainder subject to total divestment. I like to call it subject to open, but if partial divestment makes more sense in your brain, then go ahead and think of it that way. The the subject to open, its distinguishing characteristic is that it is held or possibly held by more than just the people who we can point to today. Okay, so to A for life, then to A's children is going to be our example. At the moment of conveyance, A has 2 children, X and Y. Okay, are X and Y A's children? Yes, they are. So they are good to go. It is vested for them. They have already satisfied their whatever they needed to satisfy in order to take this remainder. So they are there. We can point to them and say, you are in the class of people who are A's children. And you are ready. Like nothing else has to happen for you to be ready to take this. Okay. So for X and Y, it's vested. However, it's possible that A has additional children. And if A has additional children, then those children will also be A's children and will then jump into the class. And so while X and Y cannot lose or forfeit their interests, it's vested, their interests can shrink. Their interest can be partially divested. So whereas if A had died and only X and Y were the children, they would split 50-50, or they would hold 50% interest in the property. If a third child is born before A dies, then now instead of a 50% interest, X and Y will each have a 1/3 interest, a 33% interest. And this new child will also have a 33% interest. So it's vested and it can't be forfeited, but because the class is not yet closed, it can shrink. The interest can shrink. It is subject to open, subject to an open class. Okay? If it had said to A for life, then to A's children today, right, at the moment of conveyance, then the class would not be unclosed. It would be, in fact, closed. The children that exist today are the children of A that exist today, and therefore it doesn't matter that subsequent children might be born. It's no longer relevant. Or if it said to A for life, then to X and Y. Again, that's indefeasibly vested because the class is not open. Okay, it is a closed class in those two examples. Okay, so that is the main feature here is that we know who's got it. We know that they're going to take it. They cannot forfeit it, but someone else might jump in with them. Okay, so someone else might jump into the ball pit. When I'm thinking about the ball pit in COVID circumstances, it's really, really kind of, yes, Ashton.
For a closed class of persons, would that just be a regular indefeasibly vested remainder?
Yep.
Okay.
Are we good with the vested subject to open? Other questions on that one? Okay. Now this one is the hardest because it can be created in several different ways. And so I've got two examples for us on the chart. And they track the two ways in which contingent remainders might be created. In one example, the first here, we actually don't know who is going to take the property. Okay, we can know who has contingent remainders, but we don't know the definitive answer to who is going to take at the end of the life estate because it's an unascertainable person. So the person is not ascertainable, so the remainders are therefore contingent. Okay. The second example, we have a person that's ascertainable, but there's something that has to happen before they're eligible to take it. Okay, so it's not ready yet to become possessory. So either we don't know the person, or we know the person, but we don't know that they qualify yet. In both instances, something has to happen before we can point to a person and say, you are going to take this property at the end of the life estate. And those are the two ways in which it might be contingent. So let's look at the examples. To A for life, then to A's oldest living child at the time of A's death. So if we give A the same children, X and Y, we know that X and Y, and we talked about this with, I forget the names of the people, but it was the one that involved the car accident on the practice exam, on the possessory estate worksheet. To A's oldest living child at the time of A's death. We don't know the answer to who is going to be A's oldest living child at the time of A's death, because it's a date in the future, and things could happen between conveyance and end of life estate that will determine that. Okay, A could have children pass away, A could have more children. We don't know when A is going to pass themselves. So all of these things are things that might change between moment of conveyance and the end of the life estate. Okay, and so it is contingent in that we don't know who is going to take it. So if we have X and Y, we'll say, well, X might and Y might, but we don't know if they will, because we don't know if they're going to qualify as A's oldest living child at the time of A's death. They have contingent remainders, and those contingent remainders are not going to be forfeited, but unless they qualify as A's oldest living child at the time of A's death, then the contingent remainders are pretty much worthless. Okay, so until the condition precedent, the thing that has to happen for them to vest, if it doesn't happen, then these aren't forfeited, they just disappear. Okay, so as opposed to being zapped like the vested remainder subject to divestment, or shrunk like the vested remainder subject to open, these kind of, it's like Thanos snaps the fingers and they just go away. Okay, if the condition precedent doesn't occur, then these contingent remainders just evaporate. Okay, so that one right there is an example where we can't even point to a person. We don't know who it's going to be. This is a similar situation. To A for life, then to B if B reaches the age of 21 during A's life. If B is not yet 21 at the time of conveyance, then we don't know. We know who we're talking about, B. We're focusing in on B, but this thing hasn't happened yet. This condition precedent, B reaching the age of 21 during A's life. Until that happens, B is not ready to take it. It is not vested. Vesting means ready to take it. So in the first example, it's not vested because we don't know who it is. So it's not vested in that way. In this example, we know who it is, but we don't know if they're going to take it. And so it's not vested in that way. They're not ready yet. Okay. And so again, if A dies and B has not reached 21 by that time, then the contingent remainder evaporates, goes away. If, however, B does turn 21 during the life of this life estate, then boom, that contingent remainder vests. B has satisfied the condition precedent. B is ascertainable. And so at that point later, we would say B now has an indefeasibly vested remainder. Okay, once they turn 21. Okay. Myrna, I saw your hand sneak up, but you've run away. I don't know. Did you have a question?
I was just gonna ask, so if A dies before B reaches the age of 21, does that mean, where does it go? Is it a reversion?
Yep.
Okay.
Good. Because of the way this one is framed, with B needs to reach age of 21 during A's life, it creates sometimes what I've been calling a hidden reversion, a reversion that's not obviously there. And in fact, there's a hidden reversion in this example too. Both of these have hidden reversions. So often you will see a hidden reversion that exists alongside contingent remainders. Yeah, Zach.
I'm trying to separate in my head contingent remainder versus vested remainder subject to divestment, because when I see the examples for those, they kind of go similar, where to A for life, then to B except if this happens. And is it the contingent remainder if X isn't satisfied, then it goes reversion, and for the vested remainder subject to divestment, it's that it's not reversion, it's that it goes to someone else instead. Is it that secondary person that makes it that?
Not
I'm just
exactly.
trying to see what.
Yeah. Not exactly, because this could say then back to the grantor, and it would still be a vested remainder subject to divestment, even though it's back to the grantor. So it would be still an executory interest.
So I guess I'm trying to understand then, since they in my head they both are to A for life and then to B as long as some condition is fulfilled. What
Right.
separates these two?
So this is the hardest distinction to make among the remainders, between this kind of contingent remainder and this vested remainder subject to divestment. Okay. And so I want to note first that that's the hardest thing to see. Okay. So, and Zach, you're asking, how can I tell the difference? So I'm going to give you a superficial answer and then a more substantive answer. The superficial answer is that this comma right here denotes the vesting of B's interest. That it's as though, and the book kind of talks about this, it's as though what's happened is to A for life, then to A for life, comma, that's a life estate. Then to B, pause, take a breath, figure it out. That's an interest given to B, vested. But if something happens, what we're going to call a condition subsequent, if something happens subsequent to this, then we're going to take it away. So it's a giving and a taking away. Okay? And that comma is what makes the difference. So note the framing down here. To A for life, then to B if B reaches the age of 21. So now I'm going to exaggerate the language. To A for life, I'm going to pause, and I'm going to say that's a life estate. The comma is going to make me pause up here, but note that there's no comma. Then to B if B reaches the age of 21 during A's life. All of that language, the condition, is stuck onto the B even being eligible to take this. In other words, then this is the substantive explanation, it's a condition precedent, a condition that has to be satisfied before B is even eligible to take, as opposed to here, where B is now eligible to take, but something might happen after that undoes that. Okay, so the difference is in the phrasing. In one, it is a condition that has to happen before B is eligible. That's a contingent remainder. And the reason we can tell is this is the superficial answer because there's no comma, right? Then to B if B reaches the age of 21, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that means B's interest has that condition stuck to it. It isn't anything until that condition is satisfied. As opposed to this one, where we pause and we say it's vested, B, you have got it. But maybe something's going to happen later, subsequent, that's going to take it away. Now, even as I understand and deliver that explanation, it's not satisfactory, okay? Because functionally, there's no difference between these two things. And in fact, I could write a conveyance that in fact, let's do this. Zach, I think it's worth doing. A conveyance that creates two different things, but has the exact same, it's the exact same thing, okay? So Zach, I want you to work with me on this. To Marge for life, then to Bart if he doesn't write on the chalkboard during Marge's life, but if he does, then to Lisa, okay? So Marge has a life estate. So what I've tried to do here graphically, the green is going to be our present interest, our possessory interest. Black is going to be things that happen, and the red is going to be the future interests. Okay, so the line of Marge's interest here is a life estate. I'm hoping everybody can see that. To Marge for life, that's pretty straightforward. Okay, what are the future interests Zach created here?
So there's two potential future interests.
Uh-huh.
Potential interest one is to Bart, and that requires no writing on chalkboard.
Mm-hmm.
And potential interest two is to Lisa, and that requires Bart writing on chalkboard.
Great. And so what would we call those future interests?
We would call those vested remainder subject to divestment.
Okay. So remember what I said about the comma?
Oh, it doesn't have a comma, so it's got to be a contingent remainder.
Good. Okay. Then to Bart if he doesn't write on the chalkboard during Marge's life. So is Bart ready to take it yet?
He's only ready to take it at the point of Marge's death.
Correct. So right now, at the moment of conveyance, he is not ready to take it. He has to go through his whole life, or Marge's whole life, without writing on the chalkboard in order to be ready to take it. Okay, so it is a contingent remainder, and Lisa's is also a contingent remainder. These are an example, I think I've mentioned this previously, of competing contingent remainders. It's either going to be one or the other. Okay, so Bart and Lisa each have contingent remainders in fee simple. Okay, so you good so far? So let's play it out. What happens if Bart writes on the chalkboard? So Marge is still alive.
Lisa gets it.
Lisa gets what?
Lisa gets a indefeasibly vested remainder.
Lovely. And Bart has
Nothing.
nothing, because the contingency can no longer happen. He did write on the chalkboard during Marge's life, and therefore he's out. Okay? So his contingency is not going to be, and Lisa's is going to be, and so she has an indefeasibly vested remainder in fee simple. And so when Marge dies, what happens?
Lisa gets fee simple.
Great. Okay. So stick with me. To Marge for life, then to Bart. But if Bart writes on the chalkboard during Marge's life, then to Lisa. Okay. Got
Right.
Marge has a life estate. Hopefully everybody's cool with that. What are the future interests?
So that would mean that that Bart has a vested remainder subject to divestment,
Uh-huh.
and Lisa has a contingent remainder.
Right. So I know that you want to say that, but I'm just going to tell you, I haven't taught y'all this yet, but what Lisa has is an executory interest.
I should have known that. I did the
Okay.
reading. I should have done that.
What Lisa has is an executory interest, but the main point is that in these two examples, Bart's interest is exactly the same thing, but because it's phrased differently, in one, it's a contingent remainder, but in the other, it's a vested remainder subject to divestment. In this one, Bart is ready. He's got it. It's to him. But if something happens, then it's going to be taken away. As opposed to this one, which is he's not ready yet. We won't know if he's ready until this condition is satisfied. Okay? So we'll come back and talk about Lisa's executory interest later. But let's play it out. Bart writes on the chalkboard. What do you think happens now, Zach?
Bart loses his vested interest,
Right.
and Lisa gets a indefeasibly vested remainder.
Great. His interest is divested. Her interest becomes vested. And she has, so note that at this point, it's exactly the same. And then when Marge passes,
Lisa fee simple.
same. Okay. The only difference is the highlighted portion. Okay. And the only reason for the difference is the comma and the way that it's phrased. So there is no functional difference between these two things, but there is a difference both in terms of the phrasing, but maybe the concept, right? And again, even as I explain it, and even as we walk through it, and as Zach gives us this turn of events, you may not be satisfied that that should really matter. Okay, that if they are in fact the exact same thing, why are we labeling them differently? And I'm with you. Okay, I don't have an answer for that, except to say that conceptually they are actually phrased to create different things. Okay, Zach, you good with that?
I get a feeling that's best I'm going to get. So I'm just
Okay.
going with if it has a comma, it's a vested remainder subject to divestment. If it doesn't have a comma, it's contingent remainder.
That's a good way to think about it. Others on this distinction? Others on the rest of the types of remainders? Yeah, Alex.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify one point on that last sheet. When it comes to the fourth scenario, it just said fee simple. Do we not call it remainder fee simple, or do we just call it fee simple?
When it comes to where, I couldn't hear what you said.
On the fourth future interest that we just learned, contingent remainder, if there is a situation in which there is a third party, we consider that third party, if the first party was to fail, to have just a remainder of fee simple, or do we just say have a fee simple? So in the example you use with Marge, Lisa, and Bart,
Okay.
so yeah, you had clicked it in, and yeah, that part where it just says fee simple. I just wanted to clarify that it is correct, just fee simple, not remainder of fee simple, but fee simple.
So until Marge dies, she has remainder in fee simple.
Right.
But once Marge dies, then she just has fee simple.
Okay.
So the important thing to keep in mind is that so long as the life estate goes, there might be changes, there might be action within the remainders, right? Here it was 2 contingent remainders, now it's an indefeasibly vested remainder.
Right.
Here, you know, in the other version, it was a vested subject to divestment, but now it's indefeasibly. So there might be action so long as this green line is continuing, the life estate persists.
Right.
It's only, you know, we know life estates only end at the end of the life. And so when that happens, that's when these jump up and become fee simples. Is that, am I answering your question?
Yes, that was basically my question. I just wanted to make
Okay.
sure I had this correct, because I
Yes.
lost information.
Right. So there's 2 things that happen. 1, the writing on the chalkboard, and 2, Marge's death. Both change the nature of the sticks.
Right.
Others on this? Okay. A word about executory interests. So that is the other one, right? So here is the other type of future interest that might be given to a third party. Let's talk about them. Where are you going to find executory interests? you're going to find them only in two spots. One is, I think, more straightforward and something that we've pretty much talked about, I think sufficiently to where you guys should have that secure. And that is when they follow a fee simple subject to an executory limitation. So 2A, so long as it's used for school purposes, and if it's not used for school purposes, then to B. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. That's a fee simple subject to an executory limitation, and B holds the executory interest. That's where executory interests show up on this chart. Okay, as attached to a fee simple subject to an executory limitation. However, as the conversations today have indicated, there is another place where you might run into an executory interest, and that is following one of the vested remainders subject to. Okay, so here we have two examples of vested remainders subject to something. And what I'm just going to tell you is that what they are, the extra thing, are executory interests. And then I'm going to sort of back out of that and talk about why. Okay, so here is an example that we just had. 2A for life, then to B, but if B smokes a cigar during A's life, then to C. Okay, that is a classic life estate to A. Hopefully y'all are seeing that pretty easily. A vested remainder subject to divestment in fee simple to B. Okay, because if B smokes, it will be divested. And then C has an executory interest. Okay. Similarly, to A for life, then to A's children who reach 21 during A's life. Assuming at the time of conveyance, A has two kids, one who has reached 21 and one who has not yet. Okay, so in this example, X is in the group, they are vested, they have already qualified as a child of A who reaches 21 during A's life, and so they have vested remainders subject to open. Y, not yet 21, but could jump into the class, has an executory interest. And if they do turn 21, they will jump in to the class and also hold the vested remainder subject to open. Okay, so these are the only places you're going to see an executory interest, either after the fee simple subject to an executory limitation or after one of the remainders. Okay, note that in both types of circumstances, what's happening with the executory interest is that the executory interest is divesting the preceding interest. Okay, here the preceding interest is a fee simple subject to an executory limitation. When it stops being used for school purposes, B's executory interest will act aggressively to divest, to come in and zap and get rid of the fee simple subject to an executory limitation, which will go away as soon as it stops being used, the land stops being used for school purposes. So it's acting aggressively to kick out the preceding interest. It's divesting. Similarly, here, when B smokes a cigar, C's interest comes out and divests, kicks out, eliminates, zaps B's interest. Okay, and so too here, Y's interest, when Y turns 21, will come in and not quite completely divest or completely eliminate X's interest, but will shrink it, will have an effect of partially divesting X's interest. Okay, so in all three examples, we have a future interest that is acting aggressively to cut short something, or shrink, in this example, something. It is executing them. It is aggressively moving them out of the way or shrinking them in the last example. Okay, so it is often discussed that executory interests act aggressively to cut short or reduce the interests that are ahead of them, as opposed to a remainder, which peacefully waits for the prior interest to expire. Okay. So remainders wait for the life estate to end, whereas executory interests act more aggressively. Okay. Note, however, that when the preceding interest is a possessory interest, like in this example, then the executory interest itself becomes possessory, right? If this is stopped being used for school purposes, then B will take a fee simple. So A is eliminated and kicked off the property, and B becomes fee simple holder. However, in these examples, the preceding interest is not possessory. It's just a remainder. Okay, note that B's interest here and X interest here stand between the life estate and the executory interest. Okay, so these are the preceding interests. So when C, if B smokes a cigar, when C divests B's remainder, C's interest doesn't immediately become possessory. It just becomes a different type of future interest. In this example, a indefeasibly vested remainder. Okay, so when the divestment or partial divestment happen, that doesn't mean they can take the property in possession. It just means that they jump into the pool of, in this instance, the pool of vested remainders subject to open, or in this instance, they replace the vested remainder that B had originally held. Okay, in all of these examples, it's acting to divest something ahead of it, but it doesn't always, to divest something ahead of it doesn't always mean it's going to become possessory. Okay. So that's some executory interest knowledge. Questions on executory interests? We're good. We're either good or we're exhausted. Yeah, Zach.
I might just be getting my terminology off because I don't have my notes from the previous discussions of fee simple determinatives and whatnot. But how is fee simple subject to executory limitation and fee simple determinative different?
Anybody want to help him with that? Why is a fee simple determinable different from a fee simple subject to an executory limitation? That's one you guys should know.
Is it that the future interest for a determinable is the possibility of reverter, and there's no like future interest given to a third party, but the subsequent to condition is the right of entry?
Well, let's just go with the first part of what you said, right? She said that the future interest in a fee simple determinable is retained by the grantor and is a possibility of reverter, as opposed to the future interest in the fee simple subject to an executory limitation, which is given to a third party. That is the distinguishing characteristic. Leave out the fee simple subject to condition subsequent from the conversation for now.
I see my issue. It's because I confused in my head. I thought that fee simple subject to executory limitation there was fee simple determinative, and this new component we're talking about now, executory interest, I thought it was bringing in a new type of fee simple. I didn't realize they're the same as what we covered before.
These are it.
It's been a long 2 weeks. Okay.
Yeah. We have now seen all that there are to see. One other comment on executory interests. In the book, you might see some talk about shifting and springing executory interest, and that's all a lot of fun, but I don't need y'all to know the difference between a shifting and springing executory interest. There is no functional difference between the two. and there are no legal or rule-based differences between the two. That's merely a descriptive. Shifting and springing just merely describes a type of executory interest. And so I don't want y'all to spend a lot of time worrying about whether something is shifting or springing. If it helps you and you get it, then great. If you don't care to think about it any further, then feel free to not. Okay? Other questions? Okay. I want to come back down to this. Okay. So I really don't want to worry too much that this vested remainder is subject to divestment and the contingent remainder, hopefully y'all have gotten that. So really I'm just focusing in on this left part here. So before Bart writes on the chalkboard in both examples. And hopefully y'all are able to see that the comma makes the difference between this vested remainder subject to divestment and this contingent remainder for Bart. So hopefully y'all are okay on that. But what I want to point out is a good rule of thumb for you. If you see in your conveyance a vested remainder of any type, here it is a vested remainder subject to divestment. If you see that kind of remainder, a vested remainder, you are not going to see a contingent remainder also. Okay? There will not be vested and contingent remainders attached to the same life estate. It just does not happen. If there is a vested one, then anything that is sort of extra that might still exist, like for example, Lisa's interest here, is not a contingent remainder. It is an executory interest. So if you see something that is vested, do not put a contingent remainder for anybody else. Okay? Similarly, if you do see something that is contingent, probably the other interests that are related to it are also contingent remainders. They will not be vested remainders. So just like up here, you had a vested and therefore you weren't going to have a contingent, so too down here, you have a contingent and you're not going to have a vested remainder, okay, at the moment of conveyance. So these pairs go together. Vested remainder subject to divestment with an executory interest. Contingent remainder with a contingent remainder. Or vested remainder subject to open with an executory interest. Okay, so those, think of the pairs, right? The vested remainder subject to's paired with an executory interest. Or a contingent remainder paired with other contingent remainders. In addition, this one doesn't have it, but sometimes you will see contingent remainders that also have reversions. Remember, hidden reversions stuck onto them. To A for life, then to A's oldest living child at the time of A's death. Okay. Whoop. We've got X and Y are A's current children. Okay. And hopefully y'all can see Though it is not explicitly there, there is a possibility that neither of these contingencies will take place, nor will there be other children of A who are alive at the time of A's death, in which case no one is A's oldest living child at the time of A's death, and therefore the grantor will take the property back. So this is an example where there is, again, hidden is not part of the description, of the interest. It is just meant to sort of point out that sometimes reversions are hidden, but there is a reversion in this conveyance as well, right? So the answer, if this was your conveyance and this was the question and it said who has what interests, this would be the answer. A has a life estate, X and Y have contingent remainder in fee simple, and the grantor has a reversion in fee simple. You can see that because if X and Y and A has no other children, if X and Y die and A has no other children, then what happens at the end of A's life? It goes back to the grantor or the grantor's estate if the grantor's no longer alive. Yeah, Logan.
So on an exam, if we had something like this, you would want us to include that the grantor has the reversion in fee simple.
Yes, I would want you to include it because it is an interest.
Perfect.
Grantor did not give away all of the sticks yet. Peyton.
I was going to ask on the Maggie or Marge or whatever example, the vested remainder subject to divestment. Does the future event that it's sort of contingent upon, I guess is not the right word in this case, but it is an event that could change the state of affairs. Does that have to be an event that is dependent on the person who holds the vested remainder subject to divestment?
Nope.
So if it were, so this is then to Bart, okay, comma, he has a vested remainder subject to divestment, but then someone else does something, okay. But what if it would depend on Lisa?
Could be that, right? So to Marge for life, then to Bart, but if Maggie loses her pacifier during Marge's life, then to Lisa. Okay, that Bart doesn't control. You're asking, what if
Lisa graduates, something like that.
Then to Lisa? Absolutely, these are all the same.
So it's just strange to me that that's not a contingent remainder because it's like she has to do something in order to take it. Because it would be functionally the same if you switched it around to say to Lisa if she graduates Juilliard, or then to Lisa, comma, but if she doesn't graduate Juilliard, it would be okay.
Everything you're saying is right, except that the way this one is phrased, I could write this exact same conveyance that would create a contingent remainder for Lisa, or that might even create a vested remainder subject to divestment for Lisa, with Bart having the executory interest. But the way this one currently is phrased, it's a vested remainder subject to divestment for Bart and an executory interest for Lisa.
It seems like conceptually they're trying to say like, here's the more definite outcome than to Bart. But if this other thing happens, then, then it could change. But really functionally, it doesn't really matter what's more likely or more definite.
Correct. I think that's absolutely right. And in fact, this might be more often, right? It might give the power to the executory interest holder to do the divesting, right? Lisa, in the original example with Bart writing on the chalkboard, Lisa didn't really have any control over it. She Bart controlled. Here, Lisa gets to jump in based on her own sort of effort. And that's fairly common in these things.
I think initially I was seeing the word divestment and thinking you can lose it, but really it just means like it can change, meaning someone else can take it. You don't have to do anything to lose it. Okay, sorry.
Correct. Yep, you got it. No, I think you're talking it through, and hopefully others are with you as you're talking it through, because I think you're stating it accurately. other questions on these? Okay, I'm reluctant to go into the rule against perpetuities in the last 3.5 minutes of class. So I'm gonna call it here. I feel like we got to where we need to be. And we'll pick up rule against perpetuities on Monday, but I'll stick around for those of you who have questions, etc. Okay? I will see y'all Monday.
Professor Keel, I was wondering, do you have like an example on your PowerPoint slides that you can quickly go over real quick with me?
Yeah. Do you have the example?
No, I was just thinking maybe you might have one. Just
Well,
to make sure I get this. Because I
Well,
want
like what kind of, I mean, I have like infinity examples.
Yeah.
So, but I need to know what kind of example you're looking for.
Let's do one with really the divestment one is the one I liked it.
Professor Keel, when are your office hours?
They are Friday mornings from 10 to 12.
Okay.
And there's a link on the Twin page that you can sort of sign up to reserve a spot in there.
Yeah, I wanted to go over like just regular of these problems to make sure I got them correct, but I didn't think everyone else needed.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Just set up a time, or you can also, if you'd prefer, just email me them. And if you've got them written down, and I can, it can be a both and, right? I can send you a response via email, and we can chat about them in office hours.
Like, I think I got them right, but I just want to make sure I'm getting it correct.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome. All right. So, Alan, you want to do a vested subject to divestment?
Yeah.
So first of all, note that it's got to start with a life estate. Okay. And when it is a vested remainder subject to divestment, we're going to give it to the first remainder holder initially. Okay. And we're going to put a comma. That comma is the vesting of the remainder. Let's see. Do you have a sibling?
Yeah.
We'll just do that. Okay. All right. So okay. To X for life, then to Alan. But if Alan graduates from law school, then to Alan's siblings. Okay, maybe they think you need it, but once you graduate from law school, you're going to become filthy rich, one of the great myths of the legal profession. And then you don't need it anymore, so they're going to give it to your sibling. Okay?
Okay.
So let's do it. What does X have here?
Life estate.
And what do you have?
So I definitely have a vested remainder, and in terms of which of the vested remainders, but if Alan graduates from law school, then to his siblings. It's definitely not indefeasible, and
Good.
I would have to go with the second one, the total divestment, subject to the divestment.
Good. And the siblings, therefore.
Well,
remember
it can be
if
contingent.
you remember the. Go ahead.
I was just speaking out loud.
Oh, okay.
It can't be contingent because we have a vested remainder here.
Good.
So they would have to have either, I would assume, a vested remainder or executory interest, but I'm guessing there's an executory interest here. Because if
Remember
I
the pair, if you have a vested remainder subject to divestment, you're gonna probably see an executory interest as well.
right, because if I don't graduate, the executory interest becomes aggressive and then takes over as a future interest.
If you do graduate,
Right.
yes. Yeah, the way this one's phrased is if you
Oh.
do graduate.
Okay, so if
Okay,
I do,
so let's- Yep. All right, so let's say Alan graduates. All right. X is still alive. So now what are the interests? So often this is be like question A, at the time of conveyance, who has what interest? That's what we've done so far.
right.
Then question B will be like Alan graduates. Now who has what interests? Okay. And so X is still alive. And so what are the interests, would you say?
So X would still have the life estate.
Uh-huh.
I did have a vested remainder. That's been taken over though. The EI has become aggressive. So the siblings now hold the vested remainder or indefeasibly vested remainder. That's what I was locked in with. And then I don't have anything.
Correct. Okay. And then X dies. Now what?
Now the siblings have the fee simple. Absolute.
Great.
Okay. Not too bad. When it comes to life remainders though, what if there's ways you can get terminated before the life doesn't expire, right?
There's ways what can get terminated.
The life estate. Before, like the person doesn't die, but the life estate gets terminated. Is there any way that type of situation happens?
Not in our course.
Okay, well, I'm just gonna leave it like that then.
Yeah. In real life, it could be or something like that. So long as X, right? What that is a life estate determinable, okay? And so you can do it, and the life estate would then terminate when X left Memphis. Okay,
And that
But-
would have its own chart, I'm guessing.
it's really the same. So we're doing fee simple determinable, fee simple subject to condition subsequent, fee simple subject to executory limitation. You could also do life estate determinable, life estate subject to the condition subsequent, life estate subject to these. And you could also do a lease determinable, a lease subject to condition subsequent, and a lease subject to executory limitation. But we're not going to talk about those last ones, the lease or the life estate determinable, all that stuff. They're very unusual. And especially for leases, they're usually governed by contract instead of this kind of stuff. But so for our purposes, a life estate terminates at the end of a life. That's it. That is when a life estate terminates.
Okay.
The remainders might shift, right? Just like in the example we just did with you and your siblings. The remainders, all the action happened underneath the life estate, but X's life estate remained just a regular old X has it so long as they're alive.
Gotcha. And is there any more charts that we're gonna know? Any other graphs that'll come into play? So this is it.
This is it. There's another, the last concept is when multiple, like if your siblings took it over as fee simple, if you have multiple siblings, then what happens when they have what's called concurrent ownership? That's our last concept for the semester.
Oh yeah, in your previous exams, yeah, we ran into that in my study group, and we didn't really know. It was like joint, and it was
Yep.
joint, and then
Joint tenancy.
tenants in common, and then joint tenants.
Yep.
Okay, we'll be going over that.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Gotcha. Well, that's all I have, Professor Steele.
I
Thanks for-
also, I got your email, but did you hear with Kiva? I told you, go on to the Appointlet on, there's a link on the Twin page that says that you can sign up for office hours.
Okay, will it always be like available? Will there ever be a time where I go on there and there's just no time available, or how does that work?
I don't know.
Well, it's full.
If there is, just email me and we'll find a time outside of that window.
Okay, I can do that.
Yeah, my first choice would be to keep it in that window just for my planning of my weeks. But I know especially as we get closer to the exam, students need, more of my time.
Okay, when will we be doing your conferences? Do you not? You might not have been the one, but like you mentioned that you will designate time frames for individuals for conferences. No, okay, I'm gonna think of something else. Okay.
I did say that that I wanted you to come in small groups, but I've kind of like the quizzes, let that go. I had all of that stuff in there because I wasn't sure how the online format was going to be, but I feel better about the online format than I anticipated. So I don't feel like those are as important.
Okay, cool. That's all I
Okay.
got.
See you later.